3 oturumumuz var. Ama birbirinin içine girmemesi için her konuşmacıdan sonra gene bir soru cevap yorum bölümü olacak. Ama tabii biz hangi oturumu yaparsak yapalım, hangi konu olursa olsun siz gene Irak'la ilgili sorularınızı sormaya devam edebilirsiniz. Siz bakmayın, ben çeşit olsun sıkılmayın diye böyle değişik şeyler yazdım. Aslında bugün konumuz Irak. Bu genel enerji ne yapıyor? Amerika'nın bütün bu şeyi tavşana kaç tazıya tut mu diyor. Bölüyor muyuz? Kürdistan mı kuruluyor? Yani bütün bunları konuşmak için buradayız aslında. Korkmayasınız diye ben çeşit yaptım buraya. Tamam. Ne sorarsak, siz ne konuşursak siz gene Irak sorun lütfen. Çok rica ediyorum. Evet. Ben hemen kaya gazının hem Amerika'daki deyim uygunsa devrimsel dönüşümü, bunun hem Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde hem de uluslararası piyasalardaki yansıması ve anlamı nedir? Ben sevgili Ed Shaw'a sözü veriyorum ve bu kadar yoğun temposunda tatilden dönüp buraya gelip şimdi yarın geri gidecek. Bu çabası için de çok çok teşekkür ederim. Ed, the floor is yours. Bunu nasıl tercüme edecekler değil mi şimdi?
The floor is yours into Turkish. I mean, what do you say? It sounds funny if you say it in Turkish.
But not so much in Chinese. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in Istanbul again, since we were last together in September, I believe it was. So I thank the organizers of this event to prepare for the summit in April. And particularly happy to be here with my friend Necdet, as well as new friends that I'm meeting this couple of days. I was a little bit surprised on how much talk there was of shale gas in America, even in the morning session. So maybe half my work's already done. Necdet suggested maybe I should talk about shale gas in Iraq instead. But I thought it might be useful for the audience to knit together some of the things that we heard already about the shale gas revolution in the United States. And in here I want to, I guess, address 4 points. One is, what are the market conditions that led to the shale gas revolution? Why did it happen in the United States and not somewhere else? And can this experience be replicated in other parts of the world? And the last area that I want to cover is indeed, as Necdet Bey has already said, the impact of shale gas in global markets. I guess the first thing is kind of a fundamental thing to bring up is the extraordinary high energy prices the world has experienced in recent years. And this is something we forget because we had the spike in 2008 and then the price collapse. But the last 2 years has actually been the highest average world oil prices that we've ever had in the 153-year history of the modern petroleum industry. 2011 broke a record in terms of average prices in both the nominal and real terms. 2012 was higher, slightly. And in 2013, we're starting the year at a higher price level this year than we had even in the last 2 years. So continuing high energy prices, symbolized by high oil prices, means quite naturally in this industry, more high prices mean more investment in production, more work on discoveries, as well as new ways of producing resources that we know are in place. And that explains the recent discoveries in East Africa and Eastern Med, areas that have been overlooked in the past. And it's not so surprising also, therefore, that these new discoveries have been more gas than oil. but because it had been oil, we would have worked on it much earlier. So one of the things that's happened is new discoveries of resources, which disproves completely, it was mentioned earlier this morning, the peak oil theory. It turns out that we can find as much oil and gas as which is a function of one, price, and therefore investments that you can apply to the resources, and two, human ingenuity as well as technological advance, which are the conditions that led to the shale gas revolution, which has coupled horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing. Nested told us that shale gas is really hard to translate into Turkish. Well, try to translate fracking into Turkish if you think shale gas is hard to translate. Fracking is a terrible term that the Americans invented. But it was really driven by very extraordinary high gas prices in the United States. $13 gas was what drove the shale gas revolution. In response, we were able to use this new technology. It's not correct to say the discovery of shale gas, because we always knew the resources were there, we just didn't know how to get it out of the ground. And the high prices allow us to both innovate as well as make the investments necessary. And this is consistent with the entire history of the oil industry. When we first found oil, it came out through natural pressure, and then we applied pumps to it to help it come out, and then we had injected gas to get more oil to come out of the reservoir, then we injected water, so we went from primary recovery methods to secondary recovery methods to tertiary recovery methods. And we should see the shale gas revolution as a natural sequence of that. So it's unconventional production. What is unconventional production today will be conventional production in the future. And we are at a stage in the United States with much lower gas prices now, where we're transferring that experience learned from gas to oil. So we just last year, we had the largest oil production increase in the United States than we've had in the entire history of the American oil industry. So producing shale gas is now moving on to producing tight oil and transferring that experience learned from gas to oil. Now, why did this happen in the United States and not somewhere else? One would think that the United States is the most mature oil and gas producing province in the world. We've poked more holes in the ground in the United States than anywhere else. It's unnatural to believe that we can revive production, given the amount of work that's already done. And some of the factors that drove the revolution, the conditions that's unique to the United States and to extend North America, has already been mentioned. The fact that mineral rights belong to the landowner and not to the state, not to the sovereign. The whole shale gas revolution was based on private lands, not public lands, where the federal government or the state owned the mineral resources. We have that in the United States. We have a strong, robust, independent oil producing sector. Small to medium-sized firms drove the shale gas revolution. It wasn't the majors that did it. That exists in the United States. The fact that we have a competitive service industry in the United States, that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world either. That any service that you want to procure is available not by the major oil companies themselves, but provided by service companies who are very competitive and are able to drive costs down even as price come down in order to continue producing that gas. The fact that we have infrastructure in place, pipelines, for example, that are well developed, the number of drilling rigs that can do directional drilling in the United States that we count in hundreds or thousands, and in Western Europe you count in tens or scores at best. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So it is really quite unique conditions that exist in North America and in the United States in particular. If you had told me 7, 8 years ago that we would have gas production in the United States that rivals Russia's, no one would have believed it. And that's where we are now. Actually, I don't know where Fatih Birol gets his statistics. But by the count of industry count, for the last 4 years, U.S. gas production has exceeded Russian gas production, and that was unimaginable even 5 years or more ago. And now we're talking about exporting gas out of the United States. Now, can this experience be replicated in other parts of the world? Here, I am much more cautious than some other American analysts or observers. For one thing, almost none of the conditions that I just listed exist in other parts of the world. You think about it. And so if this technology is going to be applied in other parts of the world, it'll probably have to be done differently than in North America. I mean, for example, you tell a Texas rancher that you want to drill on his land, which, it takes him a day to drive across. And he says, fine, because you take all the risk, and if you happen, and you pay him a fee per acre for his land, and if you happen to succeed, since he owns the mineral rights, he gets royalty for it. You ask a Polish farmer the same thing, and he says, why? What's in it for me? He doesn't get any revenue from the gas production. Why are you putting a footprint on my land and I don't benefit from it? So it's going to be done differently. Population density is different in Europe than in North America. So maybe there needs to be a lot more science rather than experimentation in the way we go about shale gas. One of the other things I mentioned was the fact that we have small to medium-sized firms that drove the shale gas revolution in North America. They don't exist by and large in Europe, at least not to the same extent. Now, does the complexity of Europe mean that it will be the ExxonMobils of the world that will have to play in this game? I don't frankly think that we know yet. I mean, it was mentioned this morning by one of the panelists that Exxon has withdrawn from Poland. Well, Exxon has withdrawn from Poland not necessarily because it's not economic. It's withdrawing from Poland because the scale doesn't meet ExxonMobil's needs. So maybe this is a space even in Europe that small to medium-sized companies will have to play, but they don't quite exist yet. So there are a lot of things that we don't know about to what extent this technological advance can be replicated in the rest of the world and in Europe in particular. I'm told that today in Davos, Shell will be signing an agreement with Ukraine on shale gas. Well, if it works in Ukraine, it must be able to work anywhere in the world. Because if you think about the opposite of the United States, a deregulated market where you have free pricing, Ukraine is just the opposite, where pricing in domestic gas prices are highly regulated, and you have a totally non-transparent market. So we will see whether it will work for Shell in Ukraine or not, and Chevron is pursuing the same type of opportunity. But I think it will take us 5 years before we know whether this can happen in Central Europe or not. What about the impact on the global markets? Here, I think it is going to be a more indirect impact than many people assume. The United States will likely not export as much gas as some people project. Anywhere I will go in the world, whether it's Tokyo or New Delhi or Ankara, people ask, when is the United States going to export LNG to us? And isn't it great that you have these low gas prices that you can provide us? Well, you know, the United States, we're very commercially profit-oriented. We're not in the business of sharing low production prices with the rest of the world. We will match whatever the market price is in that part of the world when that LNG comes. So just because the gas is cheap in the United States on a cost basis doesn't necessarily mean that Turkey or any other country will receive it at the same price. We will meet the market price. What it would do is bring more competition, supply competition into the marketplace. It was mentioned that we have a number of export projects that needs to be approved for non-free trade association countries. The U.S. Department of Energy has to approve each of the export licenses. If you were an American politician or the American government, whichever party, by the way, is in charge, you would do this prudently and take your time in approving these projects one at a time and to see what the impact on domestic gas prices will be. This will not be a flood of U.S. LNG coming onto the world market. There are 15 export projects asking for federal government approval right now. And it will be many years before we know that, and only one of them have been approved so far. And it will be a number of years before we know the extent of U.S. exports. What will be interesting, more interesting perhaps, is what happens to Canadian gas, because the United States won't need to import as much gas from Canada as we did in the past. What happens to the Alaskan gas, which may have a natural home in northeastern Asia. By 2015, the deepening of the Panama Canal will open up new opportunities to arbitrage the Atlantic Basin LNG market with the much higher gas prices in Northeast Asia. So we'll be able to move LNG from the Gulf of Mexico into Asia. So Europe's not the only market that's looking for this gas. Nevertheless, the impact could be profound, even though I'm cautious about the level of U.S. gas exports, because we've already seen the impact. The impact of the United States no longer importing as much LNG projects. At one time, there were 47 import terminal projects under application by the federal government. Well, we're not going to be importing that LNG anymore. That's already provided more spot LNG market, spot LNG supply into the Atlantic Basin market. It's led to issues about pricing formulation in the future. Some of this was mentioned this morning also. The oil and gas price linkage that is prevalent and preferred by the traditional suppliers in this market may not be able to persist at a time of more LNG availability around the world, bringing more gas on gas competition so that the linkage between oil prices and gas prices may no longer be able to be maintained. This is particularly important because, as I already said, oil prices are at historically high levels. I would submit more because of political uncertainty than because of fundamental supply and demand changes. We have already seen just in November, I believe, Statoil signing a 10-year agreement with Wintershall that's completely based on spot prices. No oil price linkage at all. Is this going to be the future? Statoil asserts that it's selling 50% of its gas at spot prices now, rather than the typical long-term take-or-pay oil price index contracts of the past. What is going to be the response of the traditional suppliers, whether it's Sonatrach or Gazprom, will be interesting to see. There's nothing inherent about the spot gas market that says that Gazprom could not be competitive. After all, the entire North American spot gas market is based on pipeline gas. So there's no particular technical reason why pipeline gas cannot be sold on the spot market. With additional liquidity in trading, oil, gas may look more and more like the oil market. You're going to be able to do exchanges and to bring more flexibility into the market. And so we will see an impact on the global market because of the shale gas revolution. Not so much in my mind because the United States is going to be exporting a lot of gas. Not so much because I think that there's going to be shale gas revolution breaking out all over the world, but it will have an impact nevertheless, and it'll be interesting to see what the traditional suppliers, how they would respond to that, which is a perfect lead-in to our next session.
Evet, çok teşekkür ederim. Bu konuda yorumlarınız, sorularınız varsa onları alalım ya da yorumlarınız. Yok mu? Çok iyi anlattı. Ha, varmış sol tarafta. Michael.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for a fascinating presentation. Not long ago, a senior member of the U.S. administration visited Brussels, and shortly after Hillary Clinton's energy speech, and he was presenting the shale revolution in the United States, and more or less warned Europe that it was in danger once again of missing a major revolution, once again because he referred to OGMs, and, you know, more or less implying that now scientific opinion is coming round to the view that GMOs are not dangerous, and the Europeans, meanwhile, have lost 10 years. And he was saying, well, isn't there a risk that the same thing is going to happen with shale? President Hollande more or less said, not on my watch. That's not exactly what he said. I mean, he said there needs to be more research and so on. So I was sort of wringing my hands in despair and thinking, you know, here's America about to enjoy a reindustrialization and so on, as the journalists are saying, on the basis of cheap gas prices, and here are the Europeans missing the boat one more time. But according to your presentation, there may be good reasons for this. I mean, sociological reasons, geographical reasons, land ownership, and so on. I mean, is this something where we should be saying, wake up, Europeans? Or should we rather show understanding for the different factors that apply in Europe? Is there a risk of Europe missing the boat, or are there good reasons for hesitating?
Well, Michael, you know Americans are technological optimists by nature. Innovation, experimentation is in some ways what the American economy is all about. And so I think what you just said reflects our natural orientation. But even as we move from the North Dakotas and the West Texas in America into, you know, Pennsylvania, New York State, and so on, we've had to address some of the same issues that European countries are struggling with in terms of the regulatory environment, even if you assume that shale gas is a good thing that you ought to pursue. What are the conditions that governments ought to put in place in order to secure public confidence so that this work can proceed in the proper way? And some of these things are happening in the United States in terms of disclosure of the chemicals that are being injected into the ground, much more public education, public awareness, public hearings, as we move to more densely populated areas, as we move into public lands. These are natural questions. We are inclined to think that an outright ban is not a very smart thing to do. If you're in the French position and you have some of the, at least on paper, some of the most prospective shale plays in Western Europe, why wouldn't you try in some places rather than to have a outright ban? But I think our orientation, the different way we approach it, has natural foundations, and they cannot be dismissed, but need to be dealt with in some fashion so that the public is well served. So I'm not particularly concerned about the European governments being careful about how they should proceed, but not proceeding at all would strike me as not being the right approach.
Thank you. Actually, I have two questions. One, you were referring to a Polish farmer. What would the Chinese farmer say? Because shale gas is also a potential in China. Is it possible to, we were talking about game changers before, can it change any game there? The other question refers to something that was completely absent during the day, which is closely related to gas, and that's oil substitutes for transportation. Does this mean that the U.S. is more open to, with new and cheap gas, to not only to talk but to do more on oil substitutes?
Very good questions. Thank you very much. On paper, the Chinese have a lot of opportunities in shale gas, and these are based on really tabletop studies rather than a lot of drilling that has been occurring so far. Sometimes when you look at the Chinese reports, people mistake unconventional gas, what Chinese call unconventional gas, with shale gas. What the Chinese are projecting are primarily tight gas as well as coal bed methane that they are going to exploit first before. There hasn't been enough work done on shale to be able to project with great confidence that although the Chinese are unlike the Europeans, unlike the French or the Germans to a lesser extent, are going full steam ahead in terms of working on shale gas. It'll be a while before we know for sure whether given the Chinese experience the last 30-some years, I wouldn't bet against them, but it will take some time. The two challenges the Chinese have that they have to resolve is one, the lack of water. So some of the more prospective shale plays are in places like Xinjiang, for example, where there isn't a lot of water available. The other area is to understand what impact, if any, there will be on seismic activity. If you work on a lot of shale gas in an area like Sichuan, which is known to be a seismically active area, which would be, for example, I think something the Turkish experts would want to look at if we're pursuing shale gas in Turkey. So those are two known challenges that the Chinese have. The question on transportation fuel substitute is a very good one. I used to be very skeptical about that. In fact, I was quoted in the Gazprom Journal as being skeptical on that just a year or so ago. I'm not so skeptical now because we are working on CNG for fleet vehicles in particular. So you have companies like UPS, a very large fleet operator that's converting their fleet to compressed natural gas. There's a lot of experimentation on LNG for long-haul trucks. So that's another area. The fleet vehicles are the first places where it can be easily applied because you can provide infrastructure to serve that. it will take some time to replace the petrol stations that started around the country, but you work on the fleet vehicle side of things first. The other area, and I think was mentioned this morning, but is an era that the United States is producing more electricity with cheap coal. Actually, the United States is exporting all of its cheap coal. Coal consumption in the United States is going down because every time you have an old coal power plant, you replace it with a natural gas powered plant nowadays. So gas gas use in the electricity sector has gone up as coal use has come down. So one way of converting gas to transportation fuel, besides CNG and LNG, which I already mentioned, is electric cars. So, you know, being able to have a cheap fuel for power generation, and then with battery improvements and so on, using gas in either hybrid or electric vehicles is the way we're going. So we'll see. It's going to be a lot of action in this front because, as you know, probably transportation fuel is where the U.S. oil import vulnerability lies. More than 70% of our product barrel is in transportation fuel only. So if we can do something about substituting in transportation fuel, that would go a long way to reducing even more U.S. oil imports.
Çok teşekkür ederim Ed. Biraz önce sevgili Ed Türkiye'de shale gaz ve shale gaz aramasından bahsetti. Ben de tam onun anonsunu yapacaktım. Bizim resmi destekçimiz olan Türk Mimar Mühendis Odaları Birliği Petrol Mühendisleri Odası'nın 20-21 Şubat'ta Ankara'da Bilkent Otel'de tamamen bu konuya hasredilmiş bir toplantısı var. Başkan Mehmet Kul da bizim aramızda. İlgili bilgiler şuradaki masada, broşürler duruyor. İlgilenenler alırlar. Türkiye'de de böyle bir potansiyel beklenti var. Yabancı şirketlerin de TPA ile ortak çalışmaları var. Hani bilginize şurada broşürler duruyor. Mehmet Kul da Genel Başkan da burada. Arzu edenler daha detay bilgi alabilirler. Ben hemen bir sonraki konuşmacıya geçeceğim. Çünkü bugün hakikaten dünyadaki bilinen üretilebilir rezervlerin %22'sine yakınını barındıran en önemli ülke Rusya. Bunun ötesinde Türkmenistan, Özbekistan bütün bunların geçiş yolu üzerinde oraları da kontrol ettiğini söyleyebiliriz. Dolayısıyla ricamızı kırmadı. Gazprom adına Doktor Valeri Nemov geldi. Bilgisayarda sanıyorum PowerPoint bir sunum olacak. Arkadaşlarım onu hazırlarsa Rusya'dan nasıl görünüyor küresel doğalgaz piyasaları bu sunumu yapacak. Valeri yapacak sunumu. Söz sende.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event in Istanbul. My name is Valery Nemov. I'm in charge of pricing and analytics, market analytics in Gazprom Export. So my presentation will focus on these issues. We have heard today a lot of meanings about future of oil indexation. If it disappear or it will exist for a lot of years as it existed before. This is really a question, and I think that there are few persons that believe that there is a future of oil indexation. The most of audience, I think, believe in that it soon disappear. But I would like just to show you some the latest information from Qatar. For example, the LNG supplies to Europe in the year 2012 from Qatar decreased by 40%. It means that these spot volumes disappeared from the market and they were supplied to Asia in frames of long-term contracts. So it is not so simple. We have talked a lot about more and more spot volumes on the market. In the last year, it was not like that. But I would like to start with Turkish markets in the context of Europe. Turkey is a booming economy, and the industrial production is growing in this country, and Gazprom was able for a lot of years to fuel this industrial growth. In the year 2008, the export supplies were 24 BCM, and in the year 2012, they increased to 27 BCM. And the share of Turkey in Gazprom export portfolio increased to 90% of all the volumes supplied to Europe, to European markets. The current annual contract quantities of Gazprom to Turkish market comprise 30 BCM, of which 16 by Blue Stream and 14 by West Corridor. It means that we have more 3 BCM that can be supplied in frames of existing contract quantities. It is a question of the ability of Turkish consumers to buy more gas during summer, because we know that there is a huge difference between winter and summer volumes. We used to hear, in the past years, we used to hear for a lot of times what is fair price for natural gas. Currently in the world, there are a lot of prices for natural gas. And I would like to divide the whole world of commodities by two not equal groups. The first one is the larger group is comprised of commodities that are exchange traded, like oil, oil products, like ore, chemicals, the agricultural crops. These commodities typically have global reference price, and it is almost the same in all the regions in the world. Among the few exceptions is electricity. It is also exchange traded commodity, but prices for electricity are different from market to market. And it depends on some specific features of this commodity, like isolation between countries and the need to build very costly transmission lines, and regulation from governments as well. And there still remain a few commodities that are highly unlikely become exchange traded in future. For example, water, or milk, or alcoholic beverages. There are some specific features from market to market, and they cannot disappear for these commodities to be exchange traded, and the benchmark price I think will never exist. And the buyers and sellers of these commodities are fully satisfied with status quo, and nothing is likely to change in future. Natural gas, however, stands alone among commodities because it is there are a lot of cases when it is indexed by other commodity, like for example in Japan. You can see it on this figure. Is the price of LNG import to Japan by World Bank, which is indexed by crude basket of oil to Japanese markets. And on the other side is the price for gas in the USA. Gas on NYMEX became traded commodity in the year 1919, just 10 years after oil. So this is quite long history. Moreover, there has historically been a clear tendency to deglobalize the price of natural gas as regional pricing models have become entrenched in Asia, for example, and in the USA, in North America. And now the difference between these two prices is huge. It comprises 5 times. And at least in Europe, there is no agreement between buyers and sellers of natural gas as to the future evolution of natural gas price. For example, buffer import price, which is published by German government, contains both oil indexation and hub-based prices. So it roughly reflects the price of Gazprom supplies to German market, so it can serve like an indicator. This is weighted average price of all the import supplies to German market by Gazprom, by Norway, by Netherlands. And the second price, which also serves like an indicator for the European market, is European gas average. This important is that this is a price of internationally traded gas. It does not reflect the price level on national markets. It just reflects the price level of gas which is traded in frames of export-import contracts. And the TTF price is the price on hub in Netherlands. Roughly reflects the dynamics of these markets. But it has nothing in common with export and import contracts. And that is important point. And an indicator is the oil price, because we have heard a lot that oil indexed gas is too expensive. But simple statistics just they show that in October 2012 the difference between oil indexed gas and oil price was 2 times, so only 50% of oil parity. And 5 years ago it was 70%. It means that oil indexed gas does not compulsorily follow the oil price. Now it's 2 times cheaper than oil. So one should say that this difference seems illogical, because now we have sophisticated LNG infrastructure in the world to provide supplies almost in all the parts of the world. But what really matters is that we deal with domestic price of gas, like in the USA, or we deal with price of import and export. And the price of gas in the USA now cannot be regarded as a benchmark for internationally traded gas, and one should take into account this fact. Another example is what we can see now is kind of half liberalization of the Turkish market, where prices of gas are still regulated. I mean end user prices. So we can see that globally markets are behaving independently, gas markets, and some of them being regulated at the same time. And this all shows that you cannot expect the dynamics of single markets to reflect dynamics of each other. As a basic feature that leads to price differences between regions. Just let me show you regional markets import reliance. North America is almost self-sufficient in terms of gas supplies. Europe is half dependent on import supplies, and East Asia is 2/3 dependent on imported gas. Does the situation roughly reflects the level of prices in this region? I think that it's quite fair. Over the past 10 years, despite some conflicting fundamentals, a broad range of exchange-traded commodities, including metals and agriculture and chemical products, has grown by 2.7, 3.2 times in US dollars. This is within the same range, 2.8 times, as the oil indexed price as measured by the German buffer price index, while the Japanese oil indexed LNG price grew by 3.5 times in the past 10 years, which only slightly outpaces the growth band for the three major groups of commodities. And it was significantly below of oil and oil products that prices for them increased by 4.3 times in the past 10 years. This was the result of the broad use of S-curve in Japanese contracts, price caps, collars, and lowering coefficients in oil indexed gas contracts that collectively serve as an indication that these contracts are not immune to gas-on-gas competition. And is the tripling of gas price fair? There are reasons to believe that that is like that. When a product's pricing dynamics match those of other raw commodities, including those that are necessary inputs to the manufacture of that product, it gives investors confidence that they will be able to successfully launch a new investment cycle. By contrast, zero growth in the USA of Henry Hub price in the past 10 years has put long-term investors in this country in dry gas production at risk, because producers must buy the commodities necessary for their investments at inflated price, and the price of their gas has not increased. Those unique conditions that exist on the market of USA are not the same in Europe. I mean, the pipeline system in the USA has 500,000 kilometers long. There are more than 100 underground gas storages in the USA. There are a lot of border crossings between states and between Canada and the USA, between Mexico and the USA. We have not this in Europe completely. Almost all the countries in Europe are dependent on 2 or 3 suppliers from abroad. Look at Poland, Germany, Ukraine, Italy, Czech Republic. They have several pipeline suppliers. Some of them have LNG supplies from the global markets. But how the liberalized trade can exist in these conditions? For the hub to reflect the fair price on market, you should have dozens of players on one market. There are no players in European market, so that's why we are quite pessimistic about possibility of hub prices in Europe to reflect the real price level on the markets, to reflect the situation of total supply and demand in this region. What I would like to do is to bring the discussion back to the realities of European market and to emphasize that before moving to some to sophisticated future, you should clearly understand where you stand now. In other words, the question is, are the existing hub prices ready to take over oil-indexed gas price? In order to for the European hubs to produce a sustainable price benchmark, they should meet two requirements. The first one is that these prices should be a barometer reflecting the situation of total supply and demand of the market, or at least a large segment of this market. Now it's not like that. Hubs in US serve as trading points for a lot of players, for producers of all types, and for distribution companies, for significant buyers from industry and for end users. In Europe, hubs serve just like a balancing points for gas from long-term contracts, from gas which has not been consumed, for different kinds of arbitrage operations, but they do not reflect the total supply and demand situation. Secondly, hub prices should be self-sufficient and fully independent from oil index contracts. But it is not true as well. For example, look at this figure. You can see that hub prices usually lag behind oil indexed contracts, and there are just a few moments when they touch the curve of long-term contracts and then they go back down. We describe this behavior with mathematical word asymptotic, and major reason for hub prices to be lower than prices of long-term contracts is the value of flexibility which comes with long-term contracts. For example, those contracts that Gazprom has with Turkey are absolutely flexible. It means that buyer can take from 0 to 110% of daily nominations as he wants. And I think that it's not impossible to buy gas on spot basis on hubs in Europe with such conditions. So long-term contract prices contain some extra premium for this flexibility. And the second reason why hub prices usually lag behind long-term contracts is the existence of one-side balancing in frames of long-term contracts. For example, in case of undersupply, it is more convenient for customer to use the existing long-term contract to take volumes from this contract. Nobody goes to hub for buying gas if there are volumes in frames in long-term contracts. And in the case of oversupply, selling gas at hubs is a quick fix to dispose these volumes that has not been consumed. For example, in Finland, there is a small balancing point. It's not a hub, actually. It's a balancing point that was created especially for volumes that can be sold there, volumes in frames of long-term contracts that have not been consumed by buyers. And the prices on this balancing point are always lower than the price of Gazprom export contract to Finland. But there is no any other supplier of gas to Finland except of Gazprom. So there is no source of cheaper gas than ours. But it's like that always. And we want to be realistic when we are talking about future of our contracts, of Gazprom supplies to Europe. We do realize what is happening on the markets, but we want to be sure that every development is commercially sound. For example, shale gas in the USA. We think that it's good because it forces interest to natural gas. It forces consumption of gas. For example, in the past several years, consumption in the USA increased by 100 BCM per year. But at what price? We should mind the cost of shale gas. At the same time, we are positively we have positive meaning about shale gas, but we are not afraid of huge influence of export of LNG from the USA on global markets. Because, look, 5 years ago, everybody was convinced that USA are going to be the largest LNG importer, and everybody told USA will be the larger LNG importer. Now it's absolutely opposite. Everybody says USA will be the larger LNG exporter. How experts could be so sure that it will be in the year 2030, as the projection of five years old did not come true. For example, we have a price of Henry Hub at $3 per MMBTU, but the real cost of dry gas production on shale plays is $6 per MMBTU, and nobody denies now that fact. You can check the statistics of companies that produce shale gas. Plus, for example, $4 for liquefaction and $2 for transportation to European market, it will comprise $12 per MMBTU. It's roughly the same price as price of Gazprom. So we do not think that LNG from USA will be very cheap alternative of gas for European market. But we do not deny that it will sometimes it will occur. We believe that there will be liquefaction plants in the USA, but the impact of these plants will be not so huge as is now predicted. What we also struggle for is more security of supply. Look at this figure. I put it especially. We combined projections of consultants, companies, and governmental bodies, more than 30 different projections until the year 2030. And they are pessimistic, optimistic, but together they show that additional needs of import of gas imported to Europe will be 100 BCM higher than now in the year 2020, and 152 BCM higher in the year 2030. That's why we believe that projects like Nord Stream or South Stream are needed by the markets, and they will serve for the security of supply. For example, Turkey already has a Blue Stream line that carries Russian natural gas without any countries between ours, and Turkey enjoys this pipeline during disruptions of gas supplies from other sources, and in the past several years it occurred a lot of times. And we believe in a prospective future of natural gas, especially of gas for as a transportation fuel, and bringing new technology of gas use to our European markets and Turkey as well. And natural gas has a bright future. That is what we believe in. Teşekkür ederim.
Biz teşekkür ederiz. Evet, yorumlarınız ve sorularınız varsa hemen onları alalım. Memnunuz yani $450 gaz almaktan. Anlaşıldı. Her şeyi de açıkladım gördüğünüz gibi. Peki teşekkür ederiz. Çok teşekkür ederiz bir kere. Yani izin sürecini tamamlayıp çağrımıza olumlu yanıt verdiğiniz, geldiğiniz için de ayrıca teşekkür ederiz. Sayın Komlev'e de geçmiş olsun dileklerimizi iletirseniz annesiyle ilgili, ona da seviniriz ayrıca. Şimdi sabahleyin katılanlar biliyor, Sayın Kenan Yavuz bakanlıkla acil bir görüşmesi çıktığı için döndü. O yüzden programda adı olmasına rağmen bu konuşmayı şu an yapamıyor ama sabahleyin kısa da olsa bir sunuş yaptı. Öğlene kadar yanımızdaydı. Şimdi Sayın İdris Küpeli gene TANAP adına finansman direktörü, o bir sunum yapacak. Bu da Türkiye için çok önemli bir proje. Dolayısıyla yani SOKAR tarafından nasıl görünüyor? Sizlerin soruları olursa hani Türkiye'ye ne getiriyor, ne götürüyor. Nabucco olsa daha mı iyi olurdu? Yani sizin yorumlarınızı bekliyoruz şimdi. Buyurun.
Teşekkür ederim. İstiyorsanız Power Presentation'a bağlı kalmadan konuşacağım. Farklı bir TANAP üzerine konuşma yapacağım. Müsaade ederseniz İngilizce olacak. To begin with, I have both good and bad news about my presentation. The bad news is that some of the information that I will be providing was already delivered in the morning, so some of them will be redundant, and they were all accurate by Ms. Ekinci especially. But the good news, I guess, to make it up, I'll keep my presentation as short as possible, so I won't have to bore you to death. The objective of TANAP is, as you all know, to transport the Azeri gas from Shah Deniz 2 region to Turkey and EU. It is strategically important both for EU and Turkey because it will help to diversify the sources of energy supplies in order to enhance the energy security. I want to talk briefly about the current status of the project and what are currently being done rather than the overall structure. The length of the pipeline, as you may know, will be approximately 2,000 kilometers, starting from Georgia-Turkey border and ending up in Turkey-Bulgaria or Turkey-Greece border, connecting to TAP or Nabucco West. There will be 2 exit points in Turkey. One will be at or near Eskişehir, and the other one will be in Thracia. The commercial operation date of the project is expected in the second half of 2018 with initial capacity of 16 BCMA. The 16 BCMA volume, however, will be achieved by 2020, of which 6 BCMA will be delivered for Turkey's consumption. By 2023, we will reach to 23 BCMA, and by 2026, we will have 31 BCMA of gas transporting. As you may have followed from the press, the host government agreement and intergovernmental agreements have been signed, and the HGA was recently ratified by Turkey in Turkish Parliament. And as for the shareholder agreement, in our current shareholder agreement, SOKAR owns 80% of the project, and the remaining 20% is owned by BOTAŞ and TPAO. Per the host government agreement, SOKAR will have to remain as the majority at least at 51% of the owner of the project, and the Turkish companies will have to own at least 20% of the project. There is still 29% of the project that you may have heard that some of the Shah Deniz members are trying to be part of the project. In terms of money, that's what I'm interested in. The initial investment value of the project is estimated around $8 billion. Though we aim to achieve project financing, it's not in the critical path of the project. Currently, we have gas transit agreement negotiations are ongoing with the Shah Deniz 2 consortium. We expect to get it finalized within the next few months, contingent upon the final investment decision of the Shah Deniz project and upstream. As for the project, we are confident that we will achieve the completion of the project within our scheduled time. In comparison to some of the previous projects, we have strong, unlike the previous project, we have strong support of both Turkish and Azerbaijani governments. And we only have to deal with the policies and the regulations of one country, which is Turkey, and that has strong support, as I mentioned to you before. Furthermore, the need for diversification of sources of energy supply, both in EU and Turkey, is undeniable. Therefore, the implementation of TANAP will be a win-win situation, both for supplier country, Azerbaijan, transit country, Turkey, also the consumer country, and other consumer countries, which are the EU countries. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Yani değerli toplu bir sunum için ve kısa tutulduğu için. Sayın Tavşanoğlu'nun bir sorusu var sanıyorum ya da yorumu. Kuzey Irak mı?
olacak.
Kuzey Irak.
Yani daha doğrusu şöyle, cehaletim mazur görürse Sayın Küpeli bir şeyler sormak istiyorum. TANAP Nabucco projesine bir alternatif mi ya da rakip mi? Nedir? Yani hiç bunlar çok fazla netleşmedi. Böyle hep flu geçtik bu konuları. Şuna bir açıklık getirebilir misiniz lütfen?
Başladığında Nabucco, hepinizin bildiği gibi biz ona rakip olarak başlamadık. Fakat sizin de şu anda belirttiğiniz gibi Nabucco diye bir proje kalmadı artık. Nabucco West projesi var ve Nabucco West projesinin rakibi de TANAP değil, Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. İki projeden birisi seçilecek. Fakat bunu seçecek olan grup, TANAP grubu değil, Shah Deniz 2 konsorsiyumudur. Bu nedenle yani TANAP'la Nabucco birbirinin komplementerisidir, rakibi değildir. Nabucco West'in rakibi TAP'tir şu anda.
Bir şey daha soracağım orada. Shah Deniz 2 projesinde ne kadar potansiyel olduğu belli mi?
Oradaki rezervler rezervler şu anda ispat edilmiş şekilde ve oradaki ortaklar projeye o kadar güveniyorlar ki 24 ile 30 milyar dolar arasındaki projenin %100'ünü banka finansmanı olmadan kendi ceplerinden koymaya hazır bir şekildedir. O kadar gazların olduğunu inanıyorlar.
Şunu bana bir de açıklığa kavuşturabilir misiniz? Neden Nabucco öldürüldü?
Şimdi aslında ben bunu başka bir bankacıyla görüşmüştüm. Benim de eski bankacı olarak. Bankacının dediği bana şuydu. Diyor ki Nabucco varken ne gazın olduğu belli değildi, ne gazın sahibi belli değildi. Ve gazın sahibi olacak SOKAR bile Nabucco projesinin içinde fazla aktif değildi. Türkiye'nin daha önce bu soruya cevap verildi. Türkiye'nin pek bir geliri, sadece 2,5 milyar metreküplük bir geliri, yani gaz alımı olacaktı. Bunlar onlar için dezavantajlı. Benim kendi görüşümse Nabucco'nun sıkıntısı çok ülkeden geçmesi ve o ülkelerdeki politikaların çok sık değişmesi. Bu Türkiye dahil değil ama ilerisinde ve çok uzun sürdü. Ayrıca sponsorları, yani ortakları bizim ortaklığımız kadar güçlü olduğuna ben inanmıyorum. Bunlar bazı sebepleriydi. Fakat yine de bu soru eski Nabucco'nun yöneticilerine sorulursa bence daha iyi. Bu sadece benim kişisel görüşüm.
Çok teşekkür ederim.
Rica ederim.
Başka tabii.
Şimdi hem TANAP tarafı var hem de Gazprom tarafı var. Yani Rusya tarafı var. O nedenle ben iki muhataba da aynı soruyu yöneltmiş olacağım. TANAP projesinin Rusya'yı nasıl etkiliyor? Rusya'nın tavrını nasıl etkiliyor? TANAP projesine Rusya nasıl bakıyor? Bunu hem Azerbaycan tarafının yorumu ne? Gazprom'un yorumu ne?
İstiyorsanız ben kendi tarafımızdan cevap vereyim önce. Türkiye'nin biz TANAP'ı operation'a başladığımızda Türkiye'nin hala bir gaz eksiği olacak. O yüzden biz sadece o eksiğe biraz katkıda bulunuyoruz fakat Rusya'nın bütün market şehrini elden alma gibi bir niyetimiz yok. O yüzden o tür bir yarışma, bir competition'a gitmeyi düşünmüyoruz. Yani gitmek gibi bir planımız yok kendi açımızdan. Fakat Rusya tarafına Doktor Nemov Bey haliyle onların bakış açısından daha iyi açıklayabilecektir ama biz rakip olarak görmüyoruz. Sadece bir eksik ve o eksiği tamamlama olarak görüyoruz kendi projemizi.
Valeri?
We think that both on Turkish and European market there is enough place for new projects like South Stream and TANAP. I would like also to emphasize on long-term character of our contracts with Turkey. So we think that these volumes are guaranteed for 30 years for future Turkish needs. So we will just check in future the progress of TANAP, and I think we will be satisfied with all that happens on this topic, and we all enjoy the development of Turkish gas markets.
Başka soru, yorum? Tabii. Tahir Bey.
Volümleri de açıkladınız. Teşekkür ederim. Onun üzerinde bir şey sormak istiyorum. 2026'da 31 BCMA dediniz. Bu miktar üzerinde Türkiye'nin alabileceği minimum ve de istediği takdirde de one stop shopping hepsini almak konusunda bir seçeneği var mı?
Minimum olarak 6 BCM. Bu 16 BCM üzerinden verildi. Diğer kısım hala o gün geldi, yani o güne yaklaştıkça da konuşulacak. Türkiye'nin payı ne kadar olacak bu 31 BCM'den? O henüz karar verilmemiş durumda. Projenin amacı yani Türkiye'nin tabii ki yeterince bir pazarı var. Bütün gazı alabilecek pazarı var. Bu bizim özellikle ben finansçı olarak finansman için tabii daha bir kolaylaştıran bir yön. Fakat bizim amacımız o değil. Bizim hizmet etmek istediğimiz market sadece Türkiye marketi değil, Avrupa Birliği ülkeleri ve çünkü bu proje Türkiye için olduğu kadar Avrupa Birliği ülkeleri için de aynı önemi taşıyor diye düşünüyoruz.
Peki o zaman kusura bakmayın, böyle gelince tersten bir soru soracağım. Çünkü West'e gidecek ya da diğer alternatife gidecek. O zaman oradaki boru hattının hangi kapasitede düşünülmekte şu anda? Yani TANAP o boru hatlarına ne kadar kapasiteyi veya gazı komit ediyor?
Bizim şu anda hali hazırda hem TAP ile hem de Nabucco West ile Technical Cooperation Agreement'larımız var. Bu Gas Transit Agreement'a da bağlı bir şey. Gas Transit Agreement'ta ilkine bizim hazırladığımız 56 inch pipeline. 56 inch pipeline bu 31 BCM'i rahatça kaldırabilecek bir kapasite. TAP ve Nabucco için de o Technical Cooperation Agreement ve Gas Transit Agreement'taki şartlara göre o da Türkiye'nin ne kadar gaz alacağını da belli edecek konulardan biri. Ona göre hazırlanacaklardır.
Evet, Osman Zühtü Göksel.
Teşekkür ederim. Ben hanımefendilerin sormuş olduğu sorulara bir anımla katkıda bulunmak istedim cevaplara. Zannederim 12. Avrasya Ekonomi toplantısında beyefendinin başkanlığında toplanırken ilk defa Nabucco'yu konuşmuştuk. Nabucco gündeme geldikten sonra çok sevdiğim bir Azeri dostum şöyle demişti bana. Bizde ne Alev'in kızından, bizim kendi kızımız var demişti. Bu da başka bir bakış açısı.
Evet. Eğer uygun görürseniz çok zamanı aştığımız için sözü ben sevgili Bülent Ali Rıza'ya bırakayım. Son oturuma başlayalım. Gene netameli bir konu olan Doğu Akdeniz.
Teşekkürler Necdet. Şimdi aynı Necdet'in de söylediği gibi Doğu Akdeniz'e kayıyoruz. Başlık Doğu Akdeniz enerji kaynakları potansiyeli işbirliği kaynağı ve gerilimler ateşleyicisi mi? Michael de İngilizce sunuş yapacağı için biraz şimdi İngilizceye kayacağım. Michael Lee will be the first speaker. He's looked at this area previously from within the European Union. I understand he wants to talk about primarily the gas deposits and potential around Cyprus, but I assume he will also want to touch on Israel, Israel's potential as with respect to the gas that has been found off its shores. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Michael Lee to make the first presentation, and he will be followed by Birisi Ekinci. Michael.
Thank you very much, Bulent. I should say that I come to this subject very much from the perspective of geostrategic considerations, political considerations, rather than energy as such. I'm not an energy expert. For many years, I was responsible in the European Commission for the enlargement process, including negotiations with Turkey, and before that, relations with the Middle East, in which Israel was part of my portfolio, amongst others. So this is my main perspective. Since leaving the European Commission a year or so ago, I'm working with the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and we have a project that is looking into the implications of the gas discoveries in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in particular, ways and means to ensure that exploration and production can go ahead without being unduly compromised by the underlying political conflicts of which we are all aware. The discovery of gas reserves offshore Israel, offshore Cyprus, offshore Gaza, and potentially offshore Lebanon and indeed Syria does have the prospect of transforming the energy security of the countries directly concerned. It has implications for the region, and also the European Union, and more distantly perhaps the United States, as well as Turkey, have a clear interest in these developments. And the overall thrust of the work that we have been doing on this subject is to consider how these resources, when they come fully on stream, can be used for the benefit of the populations directly concerned and can generate regional cooperation rather than inflaming the existing conflicts in the region. So this has been our major perspective in looking at this question. For Israel, the discovery of offshore gas has the potential for transforming its overall energy balance. From a country that depends heavily on coal and heavy fuel oil to generate electricity, and a country that has been dependent on imports of gas and of oil, there is now the prospect not of energy independence as such, because I think that's a misleading concept in any context, but at least theoretically, if these resources were used entirely for domestic consumption in Israel, it means that they would have access to sufficient resources on most growth projections for 50 or 60 years ahead. In the case of Cyprus, which is an infinitely smaller country, the 10% or so of the potential recoverable gas would be quite sufficient for domestic purposes, leaving a large potential surplus for export. There were lengthy public discussions and debates in Israel about how much of these resources should be available for domestic purposes and how much for export. An interministerial committee was formed and made a report with recommendations. And now that the elections have been held in Israel and a new government is about to be performed, there may be an official decision by the government on the potential use of these resources. This is perhaps, as the French like to say, selling the skin of the bear before the bear has been shot. But nonetheless, a lot of emotion and political energy has been devoted to the subject, and I think something like a consensus is emerging in Israel. In the case of Lebanon, the situation is several years behind, largely because of the lack of political and administrative capacity to deal with the question. Seismic surveys are now just beginning to produce data. There will be a pre-qualification tender next month, and there are prospects that, notwithstanding all the political complications of the scene in Lebanon, they too potentially can begin to exploit the resources in the Levant basin. Syria, obviously, under existing circumstances, has not moved ahead with its potential resources. And in the case of Cyprus, there have been two tenders, a number of blocks allocated, some drilling, but also some questions and uncertainties, both of a technical nature and obviously also of a political nature. From the perspective of the European Union, and I've lived and worked in Brussels for more than 35 years, so where you stand depends on where you sit. One views this to some extent from the perspective of the EU. Eastern Mediterranean gas is not a game changer for the EU. The kind of quantities likely to be available for export are relatively insignificant from an EU perspective. Perhaps, again, on the most optimistic assumption, 2% or so of our imports of gas in a decade or so from now. Not a game changer, but nonetheless, the EU is very concerned to diversify both its types of energy used and the sources of energy. And for some of our member states, like, for example, Bulgaria, this could be a factor that could help them diversify sources of supply. Cyprus is a member state of the European Union. Turkey is a candidate member. Israel is an associate member of the European Union. Therefore, we have a number of reasons why we should be interested in all of this. The interest of the United States, I think, is a more distant one. The United States would also like to see Israel's energy security reinforced. It would like to see energy contributing to solutions to the political problems in the region rather than exacerbating them. There is a concern in Washington that the disputes in the region could be exacerbated by energy considerations. There were one or two, thankfully, minor incidents that suggested there was a potential for conflict at sea over differences concerning the ownership of these resources and the delimitation of zones at sea. And I think from a Washington perspective, even though this is not a very high priority issue, we talked this morning about the incapacity of even a country as powerful as the United States to focus on more than a small number of priority foreign policy issues at any one time, so it's not a priority issue. But still, there is a concern to see that this should not escalate tensions in the region, and a more concrete concern that were there to be any incidents at sea, the US Sixth Fleet, which is never very far away, could be dragged in. So although this might seem somewhat theoretical, I think Washington is watching all of this with a distant eye, but with some concern. The work that we're doing in the German Marshall Fund is directed as much as anything at trying to identify potential sources of cooperation, even knowing the difficulties in relations between Israel and its neighbors, Israel and Turkey, and obviously the persistence of the Cyprus problem unresolved, and the accession negotiations between Turkey and the EU not having moved ahead over the last 2 years, the energy chapter not yet being open. What can be done under these circumstances to try and foster regional cooperation, and to see indeed, as the title of our study and of this session suggests, that these resources could be a source for cooperation rather than a fuel for tension. We've been looking through contacts with experts at possible areas of cooperation which could be pursued even in the present state of relations between several of the parties. One issue that has been drawn to our attention by several of the companies involved, but also by civil society groups, is the whole question of security and safety. Given what has recently occurred in Algeria, I think that it's uppermost in many people's minds that in vulnerable regions, energy installations are potentially targets for attack. And probably no country has devoted more attention to this issue than Israel. And I think Israel does have some cutting-edge techniques in this field, potentially which it could share with others in the region and beyond. Apart from security, there are questions of safety. Were there to be an oil spill in the Eastern Mediterranean, all of the countries around the Levant Basin, but further west too, many of whom depend on tourism, Greece, Turkey, countries in North Africa, could be very seriously affected. And I think in looking for confidence-building measures that could be pursued, even while the persistent underlying conflicts have not yet been resolved, the question of safety seems to me worth pursuing. On the one hand, sharing standards when it comes to legislation, and the countries concerned have relatively little experience when it comes to the management, the good governance of energy resources, but ensuring that the right legislation is in place and the right capacity is there, both to prevent accidents and to deal with them if they occur, to ensure that the necessary requirements are built into contracts with companies that are involved in exploration and production. But there's also an interest in the pre-positioning of equipment that could be used in the event of an oil spill, and the possibility that there could be at least an implicit understanding that equipment for dealing with oil spills could be pre-positioned in different countries of the region and could be used wherever the need arises. Perhaps a small and modest confidence-building measure in a difficult situation. We've also considered in our project, and Mehmet, in a paper that he wrote for our project, Mehmet Ogçu, suggested that even while the political problems remain unresolved, there might be scope for coordination and even perhaps for joint production agreements. We're all aware that if we could make abstraction from the current political conflicts in the region, the most logical thing to do with surplus gas not required for domestic consumption in Israel, for example, would be to export it to Turkey, either for use within Turkey itself and for transit through Turkey to markets in Europe and beyond. However, under present circumstances politically, it's very hard to pursue this option. Therefore, both in public and in private, in seminars, in conferences, in discussions, there has been major consideration given to how you would get this gas to market. Various ideas concerning pipelines to Egypt although there are many political obstacles to that, reversing the existing pipeline for export through the Suez Canal, but there are political difficulties there. Elaborate schemes have been discussed for pipeline connections from Israel to Cyprus to Greece and into European markets. Alternative schemes have been discussed for generating electricity, either in Israel or in Cyprus, and then building electricity cables through to Greece and to European markets. But I think most observers have concluded by now that these schemes are rather doubtful, both technically, financially, and under existing political circumstances. So probably we're looking at a situation in which surplus gas production not required for domestic purposes in the Levant basin would be exported through LNG. This too is not an easy or straightforward solution. You're all aware of the cost of LNG facilities. This is a major challenge for Israel. There's also a strong environmental lobby in Israel. It has a very short coastline in the end. An LNG plant requires at least 2 kilometers of seafront and some considerable depth. And there has been a major public debate with environmentalists being very active in this discussion. So I think the bottom line from all of this is that discussions about export from the region are somewhat premature. Revenue flows from exports are still several years away. In the case of Cyprus, probably not before 2019, 2020. In the case of Israel, perhaps a little sooner than that, but fraught with many uncertainties. And meanwhile, we are faced with the underlying political difficulties. It's very hard to see at the moment how we could achieve breakthroughs in these. We had some discussions in the margins with some colleagues. In the case of Cyprus, the situation does seem to be very stuck for the moment. Let's see what happens after the elections in the Greek Cypriot community next month. Let's see if there's any change of mood there. Let's see in the case of Israel if there's a change of mood concerning reconciliation with Turkey after the elections there too. It would probably be naive to expect a major breakthrough, but we around this table have to believe that the glass is half full rather than half empty. And meanwhile, I think further consideration of the kind of confidence-building measures that I've mentioned seems to be very worthwhile. And I think track 2 type discussions and discussions in various NGO and civil society frameworks can be useful in identifying areas where progress can be made, notwithstanding the well-known political difficulties. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. You know, if there weren't the political difficulties that you refer to, the obvious place for the gas that's discovered off both Cyprus and Israel is Turkey, and of course through Turkey to markets beyond. But you know, for all the reasons that you mentioned, you did say that it was premature to think about this, and we have a few years before we face the very real question of what is to be done with this gas. But you know, even it's 2013. It's difficult to believe that all the problems that have prevented the Cyprus issue from being resolved will be eradicated by then, or that the various issues between Turkey and Israel will be eliminated not just through some kind of partial deal, but something that gets the two countries back to somewhere near where they were before the tensions of the past few years. So, I mean, the question is out there. I very much welcome the fact that you have begun discussions on this issue, which has been ignored for a long time. Very quickly, before I give the floor to Barry Sekinci, to put the Turkish government point of view on this, or at least the Turkish Foreign Ministry point of view, you mentioned the U.S. angle. You're absolutely right. The main priority for the U.S. is to avoid this becoming an issue that exacerbates tensions between Turkey and Israel, or Turkey and the Greek Cypriots, rather than looking at it as a possible form of cooperation between the the Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, or between Israelis, Arabs, and Turks. So there hasn't been that much focus on it in Washington. Maybe it's time to try and at least begin the kind of discussion that you've initiated here. Anyway, without further ado, the floor is now with Berise İkinci.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Aslında az çok her şey söylendi. Fakat birkaç hususu eklemek veya belki tekrarlamak istiyorum. Ve son dönemde işte gerçekleştirilen keşiflerle doğal gaz arz denklemine Doğu Akdeniz'de eklenmiş bulunuyor. Ancak biraz önce Michael'ın da söylediği gibi hali hazırda bu gazın tam olarak kimler tarafından çıkarılacağı ve yerel tüketimlerin ötesinde nereye nasıl yönlendirileceği kesinlik kazanmış değil. İşte LNG projelerinden söz ediliyor, boru hattı projelerinden söz ediliyor, denizden boru hattı, Arap doğalgaz boru hattına bağlantı. Ama bunlar hepsi işte çeşitli tartışmalar çerçevesinde dönüyor. Öte yandan bu sabahtan beri shale gas konusunu da sık sık işte gündeme aldık. Shale Gas'de oyunun kurallarını değiştirdi. Bunu tartıştık. Ve ABD'ye LNG ihracatında bulunan şirketler için başka ülkelere yönelme ihtiyacı doğdu. Burada da ana pazar Asya ülkeleri olarak görülüyor. Ve Asya'daki doğal gaz talebinde çok ciddi bir artış olması öngörülüyor. Ve burada da esas itibariyle önceleri Amerika'ya büyük ölçüde yönelmiş olan Katar'ın Asya pazarına yönlenmesi bekleniyor. Tabii bir Avustralya da gerçeği var. LNG üretim kapasitesi onun da büyük ölçüde artacak ve onun da Asya pazarını beslemesi bekleniyor. Dolayısıyla mevcut çalışmalar ve tahminler Doğu Akdeniz LNG'sinin LNG olarak üretilmesi durumunda adresinin Asya olmayacağını ortaya koyuyor. Avrupa'da da biraz önce söylendiği gibi özellikle Doğu Avrupa ve Merkezi Avrupa'da Rusya'nın baskın statüsünün devam etmesi bekleniyor. Ancak çeşitlendirme bağlamında Doğu Akdeniz doğalgazı tabiatıyla önem taşıyacaktır. Burada konuya sırf doğalgaz arz talep dengesi ve teknik kriterlerle yaklaştığımızda Doğu Akdeniz doğalgazının ana adresinin Türkiye, yani hızla enerji doğalgaz talebi hızla artan Türkiye olarak görülmesi gerektiğini düşünüyoruz. Ancak işte belirtildiği üzere Doğu Akdeniz projesinde kısa vadede ilerleme sağlanabilmesinin önünde çeşitli engeller bulunuyor. Bunları işte Kıbrıs sorunu, Türkiye-İsrail ilişkileri, henüz çözümlenmemiş münhasır ekonomik bölge konuları ve çok fazla dile getirilmedi ama aynı zamanda İsrail-Lübnan ilişkileri olarak da sıralayabiliriz. Dolayısıyla son derece aslında çetrefilli boyutları bulunan bir mesele, bir proje ile karşı karşıyayız. Ve temel soru da burada bu enerji projelerinin bu sorunların çözüme kavuşmasına katkıda bulunabilecek mi yoksa bulunamayacak mı yönünde. Tabii bunun için yapıcı ve pozitif bir yaklaşım gerekiyor. Ve bu yaklaşımın tek taraflı olmaması da önem taşıyor. Bu noktada Kıbrıs özelinde hidrokarbon kaynakları üzerinde KKTC halkının da eşit hakları olduğunu unutulmaması gerekiyor. Dolayısıyla tek taraflı ve provokatif adımlardan kaçınılması en önemli husus olarak ortaya çıkıyor. KKTC bildiğiniz üzere en üst düzeyde önerilerini masaya koymuş ve bunları BM Genel Sekreterine de iletmiş bulunmaktadır. Bu noktada tabii GKR'nin takınacağı tavır önem arz etmektedir. Diğer taraftan sözlerime son verirken bir hatırlatma da yapmak isterim. Yani bugünün koşulları, siyasi koşulları el vermiyor. Yalnız geçmişte bir proje üzerinde çalışılmıştı. Bu da Türkiye-İsrail Enerji Koridoru'ydu. Bu bir çoklu boru hattı sistemiydi. İçinde petrol, doğalgaz, elektrik, hatta fiber optiği de içeren bir projeydi. Dolayısıyla zamanında İsrail ile Türkiye'yi birbirine bağlayacak bir boru hat sistemi üzerinde çalışılmış, fizibilite çalışmaları yapılmıştı. Tabii o dönemde amaç esas itibariyle Rus doğalgazını İsrail'e taşımaktı. Bugün siyasi ortamın izin vermesi durumunda ileride önümüzdeki yıllarda aksi yönde bir boru hattı en akılcı çözüm olarak ortaya çıkmaktadır. Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkürler. Ben size bir şey sormak istiyorum. Yani bu konuda ben şeyi hatırlıyorum. Haydar Berk Bey, Denizcilik ve Havacılık Dairesi Başkanı iken Washington'a gelmişti ve orada bir harita üzerinde bir sunuş yapmıştı. Orada bu münhasır ekonomik bölgelerin yanı sıra Türkiye ile Mısır arasındaki bir çizgiyi çizmişti haritaya ve o çizginin önemini daha önce hiç bu konuyla pek ilgilenmediğim için bilmiyordum. Mısır'ı da bu denkleme katmanız mümkün olabilir mi? Yani Mısır, hem Michael Lee hem de siz de ona değinmediniz. Mısır'ın herhangi bir rolü olabilir mi? Ve bu konuda Türkiye ile Mısır arasındaki diyalog ne boyutlarda? Sırf öğrenmek için sordum.
Doğru aslında, yani Mısır'ı da bu denklem içerisine katmak önemli. Münhasır ekonomik bölge açısından ve Mısır GKR'ye münhasır ekonomik bölgesi açısından da yani bütün o aslında bütün o münhasır ekonomik bölgelerin belirlenememiş olması, işte Mısır'dı, Lübnan'dı, İsrail'di, işte Kıbrıs'tı, bütün bunlar bu Doğu Akdeniz projelerinin gerçekleşmesi önünde en büyük engel olarak gözüküyor bu aşamada.
Tamam. Şimdi başka bu konuda eminim masa etrafında çok bu konuyla en azından benden daha fazla ilgilenen kişiler var. Görüşleriniz, yorumlarınız ve veya sorularınız lütfen.
Bülent, ben en son konuşayım.
Pardon. Pardon. Sanırım belki var. Yes, go ahead and please identify yourself, sir.
Michael Lotem, I'm the Special Envoy for Energy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel. Thank you for a very interesting day indeed. I just wanted to make a few very short comments. That doesn't work. Is it better now? Yeah. My name is Michael Lotem and I'm the Special Envoy for Energy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel. I was thanking you for a very interesting day indeed. Just a few short remarks. I joined the view that energy can serve and should serve as a facilitator for regional cooperation. I think that we have a lot of examples, good examples, how it happens so. And obviously on the Israeli-Turkish line there is also a good reason and opportunities. Currently, the bear is not, we managed to catch the bear. The bear will produce soon 700, or has 700 BCM of gas into gas reserves. We will start producing from Tamar, which is about 270 BCM in a few months. And this will supply the Israeli market for 20-25 years. So we are looking to export. There are other fields, the other companies that are involved from Edison. Reports in the media reported about Chinese interest, Gazprom, and of course there is a contract signed with the Australian Woodside on LNG. Of course, the Tzemach report, which is the special committee that was mentioned here, should go to the approval of the government, I hope, in a few months, now after the elections. All in all, Israel managed to do quite a quick revolution in gas. In 2006, we did not use any gas, and today 40% of our power production is by gas, and in a couple of years we will move to 70%. I agree that it doesn't make sense to be 100% dependent now on gas instead of 100% dependent on coal. But by the end of the decade, we should be also, our energy mix will comprise also of 10% alternative energy. One area that we work hard on is oil substitutes for transportation, because today most of our oil goes to transportation. And last remark is that when I look around, we don't act, even with countries with which we don't have diplomatic relations, like Lebanon, there are no areas under conflict or under claims by this side or the other side. So with Cyprus we did sign an agreement, but with Egypt, without an agreement, there is an understanding, and the same goes to Lebanon. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador Otum, can I ask you a question about Gaza? Michael Lee had mentioned Gaza in his overall review and with its gas potential. What is we know this is a very sensitive issue for Israel. What is the Israeli government's position with respect to gas deposits and exploration of Gaza?
Well, actually, the gas field offshore Gaza was given as a present by Barak when he was prime minister almost a decade ago to the Palestinians. I think that today it is the production there is much more of an internal issue between the Palestinians and between themselves, other than between Israel. Of course, Israel will have a say, but we are not yet at this point.
I think Nishat wanted to get in, and maybe. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bland. One of the areas that we discussed, Turkey could be a game maker, in my view, is East Mediterranean, because this is an area up and coming. We are still at early stages. Reserves have been confirmed, and not all the IOCs have committed to that. There's a lot of work to be done there. But the political problems Turkey has with Israel, or Israel has with Turkey, and the Cyprus issue, are overshadowing this huge development significantly. And the question is, as I also propose in my paper to the German Marshall Fund, I tried to explore the possibility whether we could push aside the political problems, because in the energy industry we very well know that sooner or later, if the resource is there, it will be mobilized. It will be extracted, it will be shipped to whoever pays for it. It's going to happen, whether Turkey likes it, or Israel opposes it, or Cyprus does this, or whatever. So energy will find its way to the high-value market. Since the current political climate shows that a way out is not possible right now, depending on what will happen in the new coalition government in Israel, there might be a breakthrough, but let's think, perhaps, fingers crossed. If this doesn't happen in the foreseeable future, whether pushing to the forefront private sector of these 3 countries, 4 countries in the region might be a solution. Whether, let's say, if Turkish government decides to stay in the shadow a little bit rather than, develop a confrontational rhetoric, blacklisting companies to operate in the region or whatever, what will be the Israeli position? What Israel will think about that? Whether you think this is a workable assumption if private sector players from Turkey, from Israel, from Cyprus, Egypt, Lebanon, US could work on it. The second question is about the US again. And US is losing its interest in EastMed. It's scaling down the operations of 6th Fleet. Now I think it's at the lowest level as far as I know. Whereas EastMed is becoming critically important for not only energy security, but also regional security matters. Whether US will be able to flex its muscles and try to broker a deal between these conflicting parties so that joint development of resources in East Med could be possible? Thank you.
I'd like to address that question too, but Ed Chow might want to pick it up. He certainly wants to join the discussion.
Well, I wasn't going to pick up the last question, partly because U.S. leadership, or lack thereof, is a little bit like what gentlemen used to say about ladies in the politically incorrect days. You can't do with them, you can't do without them. But I was going to ask the question of Turkish friends, as well as a follow-up question to our Israeli friend. To our Turkish friends, the question is there, setting aside the Cyprus discovery, which I understand that Turkey would well have a issue of principle involved, what is the objection, if anything at all, on importing gas from Israel? I mean, after all kinds of economic relationship between Turkey and Israel continues to go on, as I understand it, in spite of the cooling official relationship. What would be the objection in importing gas from offshore Israel in non-disputed zones in Israel? And to our Israeli friend, the question is pipeline gas thought about equally as LNG, or did the decision to go towards Woodside presupposes an LNG solution to the export question, or am I reading too much into it?
Let's start with the second part, please.
As far as the government is concerned, there was no decision yet because the government did not adopt the committee's report or recommendations. I guess that at the end of the day, a mix would be the best solution, and one does not exclude the other. We heard before that it's not a game changer, maybe not to the whole of Europe, but to some specific parts of Europe, it may. I spent a few years in Azerbaijan, and I was watching very closely the European effort on 6 BCMs. So if we are talking in Israel about 10 to 15, it is meaningful, at least on a regional or sub-regional level. As far as the Israeli companies are concerned, they do what they wish to do, and they do it. I can tell you that Israeli companies were present in Africa many, many years before we had diplomatic relations with African countries. So the private sector is a good and blessed and encouraged route to go through. But of course, as I was saying earlier, there are some areas that you can do business and forget about politics. But that concerns more washing machines and textile. But when it comes to infrastructure, government has to step in.
Yeah, and to pick up from that point, Ed, I mean, as I said in my comment after Michael Leeds' presentation, theoretically, the obvious place for the gas that's found almost anywhere in the Eastern Mediterranean is Turkey, and through Turkey elsewhere. But we're not living in a theoretical, ideal kind of world, and for all the practical reasons that we have talked about, the idea of the Israeli exports ending up in Turkey in the foreseeable future, as I said, is not feasible or likely, barring changes in the political atmosphere. But to pick up, why? Have you not been following the tensions between the two countries?
Why does the cooling, I understand what you said about Israel and infrastructure and so on, but from a Turkish point of view, why does the cooling official relationship disrupt what might be a natural trade in gas?
Anybody else want to jump in on this?
I'm not arguing the fact, I'm trying to understand it.
Well, I mean, just to jump in there, I agree there's no reason of principle, but it depends also how the exports would take place. And, I mean, the construction of a large LNG plant, which maybe Woodside is going to do, is going to take a very long time. But the kind of model that people had been thinking about when they considered Turkey as a potential market and as a potential transit country would have been through the construction of a pipeline from the fields offshore, either to Cyprus or directly to Turkey. Now, obviously, in the present climate, no one is going to invest in such a project. Now, there could be exports through LNG once Israel has the necessary facilities, but I think it's an infrastructure issue linked to the political climate.
Şimdi izin verirseniz birkaç tane nokta var Doğu Akdeniz'de dikkatimize gelmesi gereken. Bunlardan bir tanesi münhasır ekonomik bölgenin paylaşımı konusunda Karadeniz'deki kıyıdaş ülkelerin hakkaniyete uygun olarak yaptıkları çözümden çok daha farklı bir sürecin işlediğini görmemiz lazım. Özellikle Yunanistan ve Güney Kıbrıs Rum yönetimi Kıbrıs Adası gibi, Meis Adası gibi çeşitli adalara bizim görüşümüze göre Türkiye'de uluslararası hukuk, deniz hukuku bu konuda uzman görüşlerin ve bizim resmi görüşümüzün çok ötesinde Türkiye'yi adeta çizdikleri bütün bu adalara da ayrı kıta sahanlığı vererek Antalya Körfezi'ne yani Türkiye'yi karasularına sıkıştıran bir tutum içindeler. Yani bunu Türkiye'nin, bu tamamen Türk-İsrail ilişkilerinin ötesinde bir şey ve Türkiye baştan beri buna karşı çıkıyor. Dolayısıyla bir kere bu tespiti yapmamız lazım ve Türkiye buna uluslararası hukukun gerektirdiği şekilde karşı çıkıyor. Birleşmiş Milletler nezdinde ve ilgili kurumlar nezdinde ve diyor ki bu çözüm hakkaniyete uygun değildir. Uluslararası hukuka göre Batı kıyılarında Kıbrıs Adası'na ve bölgedeki adalarda Yunanistan'a karasuları dışında kıta sahanlığı verilmemesi gerekir. Geniş kıta sahanlığı ve münhasır ekonomik bölge alanlarının bölgeye hakim iki kıyının sahibi Mısır ve Türkiye arasında sınırlandırılması gerekir. Yani bir kere bu tespit var. Bunun ötesinde gene Türkiye'nin tezlerine göre mevcut bu paylaşımda Türkiye'nin kabul etmediği konuda Mısır'la Türkiye'nin aslında Türkiye'nin çözümünü ne yaklaşsa Mısır'a daha fazla bir münhasır ekonomik bölge kalacağı. Belki Haydar Bey'in Washington'daki sunumunda o vardı. Şimdi haritaları göstermek mümkün değil. Konuyu da dağıtmayalım ama bütün bu tespitlerin ötesinde yani Türk-İsrail ilişkilerinde hiçbir şey olmamış gibi sadece gaz ticareti üstünden işi götürmenin mümkün olmayacağı çok açık. Üstelik şimdi Güney Kıbrıs Rum yönetiminin keşif yaptığı 12. blok konusunda Türkiye'nin münhasır ekonomik bölge iddiası olmayabilir. Onun lokasyonu açısından ama orada da KKTC'nin hakları açısından Türkiye karşı çıkıyor. Tek taraflı fiili bir durum yaratıldığı için. Dolayısıyla bu konuda İsrail ya da bir başka ülkenin Türkiye'nin kabul etmediği çözümlere destek verdiği noktada Türk-İsrail ilişkilerinin önümüzde düzelme ihtimali görülen sürecine zarar da verilebilir. Yani toplantı başlığında olduğu gibi, oturum başlığında olduğu gibi birbirimize yakınlaşabilirken bütün bunları öne çıkarttığımızda tam tersine de ayrılma sürecine girebilir. Ben böyle değerlendiriyorum.
Anybody else? Başka soru, yorum, görüş? El kalkmadığına göre izninizle ben Mehmet Ölçü'nün sorununa değinmek istiyorum. Şimdi bu ABD 6. filosunun ABD'nin Doğu Akdeniz'deki askeri gücünün azaldığını ve belki etkisinin de azaldığını söylemişti. Şimdi ABD'nin doğru Çin'e kayma, tilt to Asia diye bir yaklaşımı var. Çin'in önemini, artan önemini hesaba katarsak bu normal. Fakat aynı zamanda Bahreyn'deki merkezi olan ana üssü olan 7. filonun ne kadar güçlü olduğunu ve İran'a karşı bütün hesaplarda ne kadar caydırıcı bir güç olarak ABD tarafından vurgulandığını görüyoruz. Yani ABD'nin Obama önceliğini ikinci döneminde ekonomiye, iç politikaya, nation building deyip yani artık biz buna odaklanmamız, ABD'nin kendi iç sorunlarına odaklanmamız gibi bir yaklaşımı var. Ama Ed'in de söylediği gibi yani ABD istese de istemese de ve daha doğrusu ima ettiği gibi istese de istemese de oradaki sorunlardan soyutlanması mümkün değil. İlginç olan şu, ABD sadece icraatları da değil, icraatsızlığıyla örneğin Suriye'de olayların seyrini etkileyebilecek bir güce sahip tek süper devlet. Her ne kadar da kendisini soyutlamak istese de çıkamıyor. Bu girişten sonra özellikle Kıbrıs sorunuyla ilgili olarak ve aynı zamanda Türk-İsrail sorunlarına tutumunu ve ikisi de tabii doğal olarak o bölgedeki gazın sevkiyatını etkileyecek sorunlar. Şunu söylemek istiyorum. ABD belki en son Annan planı esnasında ciddi bir diplomatik girişim yaptıktan sonra daha önce de zaten birkaç istisna dışında uyguladığı Kıbrıs meselesini çözmek yerine idare etmek politikasına döndü diyebiliriz. ABD ile Türkiye arasında çok acil konular var. Tabii Kıbrıs konusu da ben bir Kıbrıs'ta doğan bir Türk olarak konuşuyorum. Mutlaka önemlidir. Fakat Kıbrıs sorunun çözümü için ABD elindeki diplomatik kapitalin bir bölümünü bile bu aşamada harcamak niyetinde değil. Ve bunun da değişeceğini sanmıyorum. O yüzden Kıbrıs'taki daha önce de belirttiğim gibi Kıbrıs adası etrafında bulunan gazın sorunu çözme planları yerine onun sorunu daha da büyütmesi tehlikesine daha fazla ve o da nispeten diyorum daha fazla odaklandığını söylemek mümkün. İsrail-Türkiye ilişkilerine gelince orada da ilginç bir yaklaşım var. Tabii ABD, İsrail ile Türkiye gibi iki önemli müttefiki arasında sorun olmasından rahatsız. Fakat Obama yönetimi özellikle birinci dönemde bunu ikisinden birbirine compartmentalization yapıp ikisinden birbirinden ayırabildiğini görmüştük. Bunun ikinci dönemde de devam etmesini bekliyorum. Obama yönetimi iki tarafı da ikna etmeye çalışmıştı geçmişte ama yani bir hayati bir sorun olsa belki daha fazla efor sarf ederdi. Bunun ötesinde tabii hem Tel Aviv'le hem de Ankara'yla başka sorunları var. O yüzden bu konuya el atmadı. Ama İsrail'le ilişkilerini bir tarafa, Türkiye ile ilişkilerini bir tarafa koydu ve Türkiye ile İsrail arasındaki gerginliğe rağmen ikisiyle de ilişkilerini en iyi seviyede sürdürmeye çalıştı. Önümüzdeki dönemde bunun da değişeceğini sanmıyorum. Ve bu yüzden İsrail gazının iki tarafı yakınlaştırıcı bir unsur olarak ABD tarafından sunulması ve ABD'nin diplomatik gücünü bunun arkasına koymasını da pek beklemiyorum. Ve genel olarak da son olarak bunu da söyleyeyim ve kapatacak diyelim. ABD'nin Orta Doğu'ya girişi İngiliz ve Fransızların 2. Dünya Savaşı'ndan sonra o bölgeden çekilmesi, yani kolonyal döneminin bitmesinden sonraydı. ABD 2. Dünya Savaşı'ndan sonra geçen sene değil 2011 yılındaki Arap Baharı'na kadar demokrasiye pek öncelik vermeden İslamcıların özellikle dışlandığı ve otokrat, diktatör ve mutlak kralların yönettiği sisteme karşı inanılmaz bir müsamaha göstermişti. Ve orada kaba gücünü de çoğu zaman onları desteklemek için de dolaylı veya direkt bir şekilde kullanmıştı. Arap Baharı ile daha değişik bir yönteme girdiklerini görüyoruz ABD'nin. Özellikle Obama'nın Arap Baharı esnasında önce Ben Ali sonra Mübarek'in gitmesi esnasında çizdiği çizgi bir nevi sistemin dışladığı İslamcıların iktidara gelmesine müsamaha etmesi hatta onu desteklemesi ki bunu özellikle Morsi ile görüyoruz. Yeni bir denklem yaratmıştı. Fakat Stevens'in öldürülmesinden sonra o konuda bir böyle çekingenlik, bu yolda devam ettiği bir çekingenlik görüyoruz. Bunun da nasıl etkileyeceğini ABD'nin Orta Doğu yaklaşımını önümüzdeki günlerde göreceğiz. Çok dağıtmayalım ama bu konudaki bazı görüşlerimi paylaşmak istedim. Başka yorum veya soru yoksa Hakan Bey'e döneceğim. Var. Buyurun.
Şu Doğu Akdeniz şeyini kapatırken bölümünü Suriye'deki tartışmalar içerisine enerji koridorları da giriyor. Dış politika argümanlar arasında. Böyle bir Türkiye'yi bypass eden bir hat gerçekçi midir, gündemde midir?
Başka birisi yoksa buna ben gireyim. Banyas hattından bahsediyorsunuz muhakkak. Ben de gördüm o haritaları. Kuzey Irak'ta bulunan petrolün Irak Kürt bölgesinde Suriye Kürtlerinin egemen olabileceği, en azından otonom olabileceği bir bölgeden geçip Akdeniz'e o şekilde geçme projelerinin tartışıldığını görüyorum. Yani şu anda bunu tartışmak için bile biraz erken gibi geliyor bana. Çünkü şu anda Suriye'de nasıl biteceği belli olmayan bir iç savaş var. Belli ki Esad tahmin edildiğinden daha fazla direniyor. Arkasına Rusya ve İran'ı almış ve ikisi de hala Esad'ı bırakma niyetinde olmadıklarını hem icraatlarıyla hem demeçleriyle gösteriyorlar. Bu iş belli ki uzayacak. Uzamasının bir sebebi de tabii ABD'nin Türkiye ile aynı hedefi paylaşmış olmasına rağmen bir dereceye kadar frene basmış olması. O da daha önce söylediğim konuyla bağlantılı. İslamcıların, kendisini radikal olarak gördüğü İslamcıların Suriye'de iktidara gelmesinin sakıncalarını kale alan ve hesaplarını ona göre yapmaya başlayan bir Amerikan yönetimini görüyoruz. Bu da tabii doğal olarak Ankara'yı rahatsız ediyor. Ama bu aşamada öyle bir boru hattının gerçekleşmesi ve dış dünyanın, ABD'nin, Avrupa Birliği'nin, diğer ülkelerin buna, diğer güç odaklarına buna nasıl yaklaşacaklarını söylemek için bence en azından biraz erken. Başka bu konuda yorum yapmak isteyen varsa, aksi görüşü savunan varsa vallahi memnun olurum. Yokmuş galiba. O zaman Hakan Bey son sözü söylemek için aktarıyorum sözü.
Hanımefendiler, beyefendiler, 7,5 saattir buradayız. 7,5 saat içerisinde 22 kişi söz aldı. Benim dışımda Sayın Necdet Pamir, Sayın Murat Mercan, Sayın Berris İkinci, Sayın İbrahim Arınç, Sayın Kenan Yavuz, Sayın Bülent Ali Rıza, Sayın Mehmet Öğütçü, Sayın Pars Kutay, Sayın Tahir Uysal, Sayın Et Çav, Sayın Valeri Nemov, Sayın İdris Küpeli, Sayın Michael Light ve Michael Lee söz aldılar. Bunlara da Michael Lotem, Mete Gürel, Oktay Şen, Osman Göksel, Serpil Yılmaz, Leyla Tavşanoğlu, Selim Oktar, Tuğçe Varol da katkıda bulundular. Böylesine verimli bir yuvarlak masa toplantısının tertiplenmesi konusunda ortaya koyduğu yüksek performanstan dolayı Sayın Necdet Pamir'i kutluyor, ona Marmara Grubu Vakfı'nı oluşturan arkadaşlarım adına minnet ve şükranlarımı arz ediyorum. Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nin Dışişleri Bakanlığı'na, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nin Enerji Bakanlığı'na da gösterdikleri yüksek alakadan dolayı teşekkürlerimizi arz etmeyi bir görev biliyorum. Öte yandan Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nden teşrif eden değerli dostlarımız Bülent Ali Rıza ile Edward Shaw'a da teşekkürlerimizi ayrıca sunmayı bir görev addediyorum. Beni ve arkadaşlarımı böylesine beyin fırtınaları konusunda ikna eden, yol haritamızın şekillenmesinde yardımcı olan Selim Oktar kardeşime de teşekkür ve şükranlarımı sunuyorum. Sözlerin başında söyledim. Bugün toplam 22 konuşmacı söz aldı. Bir arama toplantısı için hayli önemli, o oranda değerli düşünceler, deyimi gerekirse bir beyin fırtınası sergiledi. İzninizle burada küçük bir bilgiyi yüksek heyetinizle paylaşmak istiyorum. Nabucco'nun öldüğü söylendi. Nabucco projesinin vefat ettiği söylendi. Değişik rahmete yollandığı söylendi. Şimdi 1998 yılında ki sol başta oturan Osman Göksel arkadaşım bu işin profesörüdür. Bu işi yapandır. 98 yılında Bakü, Tiflis, Ceyhan boru hattı projesi ortaya atıldığında ne Türkiye'nin, ne Azerbaycan'ın, ne de Gürcistan'ın parası da yoktu, pulu da yoktu, hiçbir şey yoktu. Ama Türkiye'de Süleyman Demirel, Gürcistan'da Edward Şevartnadze, Azerbaycan'da Haydar Aliyev ve Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde Clinton vardı. Onların siyasi iradesi vardı. Bundan evvelki Nabucco'nun bence yok oluşunun en büyük nedeni siyasi idarenin yokluğuydu. Kararlılık yoktu. 98'de biz yola çıktığımız zaman hatırlıyorum, o zaman yayınlanan bir iki gazete bizim 1. Avrasya Ekonomi Zirvesi'yle adeta alay ettiler. Bakü'den petrol yüklenecek, Mersin'den denize dökülecek. Hayal dediler. Ama o projenin mimarı aramızda Osman Bey lütfettiler. Açılışta tek sivil toplum kuruluşu vardı, Marmara Grubu Vakfı. O büyük açılışta bizi de aralarına aldılar. 10 yıllık semeremizin sonucunu orada gördük. Değerli katılımcılar, bir sivil toplum kuruluşu için çok önemli olan bu fırsatların tartışılması, şüphesiz enerji alanında çizilecek yol haritamızın 16. Avrasya Ekonomi Zirvesi'nde rehberlik yapacağına inanıyorum. Dolayısıyla böylesine verimli günün sonunda 16. Avrasya Ekonomi Zirvesi'nin daha şaşalı bir görüntüyle gerçekleşeceğine olan inancımla yüksek heyetinize, şahsım ve arkadaşlarım adına teşekkür ediyor. 9-11 Nisan 2013 günleri İstanbul'da beraber olabilmek ümidiyle saygılarımı sunuyorum. Teşekkürlerimle. İyi akşamlar.